tell you about the views of the New York Times. In this book of mine, in a special chapter devoted to Cambodia, I analyzed every item, every line that the New York Times published on Cambodia in 1975. You say that allegedly we assert that the New York Times created the Pol Pot regime. What I assert is that throughout 1975, throughout the first part of it, you distorted the previous government, the previous society, the society which was very benign. You distorted it systematically.
Do not speak to John as you. He does not work for the New York Times.
No, I'm speaking, I see, all right. The New York Times, I'm sorry. The New York Times has been distorting the social pattern, the social scheme, the society of Cambodia in every article of it systematically, daily. When the Pol Pot clique appeared on the scene, the New York Times represented that clique as consisting even of not communists, but mostly agrarians, and of course highly educated people, uncorruptible, disinterested, and so on and so forth. Compared with the previous government, the New York Times represented the Pol Pot clique as a group of saints, almost saints. There was not a single derogatory word about it, while the previous government was called corrupt, inept, totalitarian in every item. Now, you were conducive to the advent of the Pol Pot government, to the New York Times. Yes, I'm sorry, the New York Times was conducive to the advent of the Pol Pot government. More than that, according to my studies, the blood of several million Cambodians is on the hands of the New York Times. Not of you, sir, of the New York Times.
You know that.
Excuse me, I'll finish. This is in my book, and you are welcome to debate. You say it is silly for the New York Times to appear for a debate. You are very clever, as the New York Times, is very clever, as all monopolies are. They do not want to appear to a debate. Here is a book. Here is all textual evidence. Every item is given verse and chapter. It is scholarly work. Please appear and debate it. I'm saying to the New York Times, but the New York Times doesn't do it. Instead, the New York Times sort of, just behind the scenes says, that this is exaggeration, that the person is a fascist, hysterical, and so on and so forth. Just several slurs you already made, not the New York Times, made in your speech. And to finish, you exemplify the New York Times. You are typical of the New York Times. You were on the New York Times, and you typifies its moral cowardice, its cunning, and its monopoly position. You do not want to debate fairly. You want to divert the conversation. You don't want to have a debate on the merits of the case. Allegedly, that the New York Times created the Russian Revolution. And this is absurd, but no one is saying that.
Nobody.
No one is saying that. What we are saying, and what Mary Byrne was saying, is for 2 decades, the New York Times whitewashed the Stalin's regime, the Soviet regime, and you did it consistently. I analyzed the daily reportage of the New York Times in 60 years, and I am responsible for my words. Walter Duranty, the correspondent of the New York Times for 2 decades, distorted reality daily. He was cunning. He was a very clever and cunning propagandist for Stalin. Not only did he whitewash the regime, he whitewashed Stalin himself. According to Walter Duranty, Stalin is the greatest statesman living. These are his words. I have quotations, hundreds of quotations like that. But you helped Stalin to keep in power, and the New York Times helped Stalin to become legitimate. And you helped Stalin to such an extent that no one else but Stalin praised Walter Duranty, the correspondent of the New York Times, for his service to the Soviet regime.
that Lev said at the press conference announcing the formation of the alternative to the New York Times committee was that Lyndon Johnson used to call the editor or the owner, I forget, of the New York Times and check out cabinet appointments with him to see if the Times, or to quote Lev Navrozov verbatim, to see if those appointments were okay.
And Lyndon,
let me support a value judgment you made that the government currently and in the recent past and public opinion apparently has not been persuaded to accept overall the policies of the New York Times. I confirm that to you right now. The New York Times is not totally effective. The New York Times has lost, I think, the presidential election in '72 and in 1980. The New York Times supported McGovern, and they supported Jimmy Carter.
Moynihan.
There's no question about it. I'm not going to assert here, disregarding for the moment the cultural monopoly, and that's another area. Within the metropolitan area, to be a monopolist is not to monopolize American public opinion. It affects it. They do permeate and affect osmotically and indirectly the three networks. You can look at the agenda of the day on news, and these studies have been made, and a remarkable conformity between what the three networks show on evening news and the New York Times agenda. Also,
but it's not a radical bias.
All right, we'll get to the quality of the bias again in a moment. Now, with respect to the New York Times in Vietnam, I'm not going to self-describe myself as an authority, but I'm a very, very, very durable student of that. I, as a member of the Board of Trustees of Freedom House, and helped to found the project which led to Peter Braestrup, Braestrup.
I worked with him, yeah.
Right.
I know.
And Peter spent 6.5 years doing a content analysis of the major newspapers and the networks and the news weeklies, and published a 2-volume book called The Big Story. I don't know whether you read those 1,400. You respect him, don't you?
Well, yes, he's a nice guy. He's a very, very gung-ho hawk like yourself, and he extremely, he very violently pro-war. He was very much for the Vietnam War, and he, as a matter of fact, he's a bit of a war lover. He's a very nice guy.
Yeah. All right.
Lev Navrozov is founder for the Center for the Survival of Western Democracies and the alternative to the New York Times Committee. John Hess, former writer for the New York Times, now syndicated 50 papers, freelance television reporter. Murray Barron, who is speaking, is a founder of the Liberal Party and the Americans for Democratic Action, former member of the National Council on Foreign Policy, and a former trustee of Freedom House. And we were talking earlier about the totalitarian regimes versus the authoritarian regimes, a distinction which a lot of intellectual forces don't want Americans to appreciate. If somebody who is anti-communist, like Syngman Rhee or the Greek colonels, or
people who are dedicated to liberty.
With respect to authoritarian versus totalitarian regimes, it comes with ill grace from the New York Times to suggest that there is an equality of concern with respect to those two types of tyrannies. The New York Times simultaneously, with its relentless expose of Chile and Somoza and South Korea and Taiwan and other second-rate tyrannies, simultaneously in 1976, 77, 78, 79, 80, and 81, has editorially promoted an American foreign policy that would deal with the Soviet Union, Communist China, Eastern Europe, with the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. The New York Times now is promoting the possible conversion of El Salvador into another type of Cuban dictatorship. The New York Times, whose Herbert Matthews did a great deal to achieve the Castro takeover, has been promoting trade, has been promoting negotiations, has been promoting recognition, financing, trade, credit, and aid to the communist tyrannies. Now, the difference between the two is the difference I found in 1941, June 23rd. As an anti-communist of that day, I favored the United States aiding the Soviet Union, which was then slaughtering the Jews and others in the Soviet Union, because Hitler was the greatest menace. The New York Times, not you, John, I don't know you well enough, I don't know your politics well enough. The New York Times' role is one of remarkably eloquent duplicity and double standards when it comes to treating with the communist threat. But give us a near-fascist, semi-fascist, non-communist tyranny, and the New York Times soul really flowers to its fullest liberal embodiment. The New York Times is earning for itself throughout the nation. Not everywhere, not all the time, but the New York Times now must feel itself under siege because the dissidents about the New York Times embraces liberals and conservatives and moderates as never before in the history of the New York Times. So your day, not you personally, the day of the New York Times being with impunity a double standard promoter of the acceptability of communism, as being a negotiable partner that can live in peace with the free world, that notion is being challenged as never before. Vide Poland.
Now, my university, which is one of the oldest universities in the United States, is going to publish in September my chapter with analysis proving that Pravda, ironically enough, that the totalitarian newspaper is on the whole more truthful than the New York Times. You are welcome to my analysis.
Thank you.
You're welcome to my analysis, and you are welcome to a debate. It's a very long chapter. It has many quotations. I analyze one issue of Pravda and one issue of the New York Times. Are you surprised, sir? Why are you surprised? Pravda is a totalitarian newspaper of a totalitarian society. It is engaged in propaganda. The New York Times is a private group, but a private group may be more mendacious than the totalitarian government. In many respects, the New York Times was more mendacious about Stalin than Stalin's propaganda. Walter Duranty said things about Stalin more complimentary than Soviet propaganda ever did. Do you know, sir, that the New York Times said, for example, that the chief of the Soviet police was a tall, handsome man, Beria. Now Beria was a dwarf. Soviet propaganda never said that the Soviet secret police chief Beria was tall and handsome. But the New York Times, in the person of Walter Duranty, said that. So this is one of thousands of cases when the New York Times is more mendacious, that when it distorts reality more than Pravda. Don't be surprised. Read my chapter first, and I invite you or any staffer of the New York Times to a debate. Now, there are several points, you've made about the fact, this is a very common point, about the fact that the New York Times is not monolithic, that all views are represented and so on, that we are unfair, picking up some views and ignoring others. And the classical case is, of course, William Safire, who always says the opposite of what the rest of the staff says. This is true. But my analysis of Cambodia in 1975 and its coverage by the New York Times indicates that the debate between William Safire and the rest of the New York Times was constructed in such a way as to make William Safire simply a puppet, a straw man whose argument would be defeated. The New York Times did it, for example, by giving his opponents 6 times as much space as to him. They did it, it was like a fix in sports. When one boxer is allowed to hit his opponent 1 time, and his opponents are allowed to hit him 20 times. William Safire played simply the role of a debater. that was a phony role because it was fixed beforehand that he would be defeated. The New York Times makes its points that it wants to make, and it allows a debate only in as much as that debate will not defeat its own viewpoints. And this is natural. I'm not accusing the New York Times of its views. You are saying that I'm saying that the New York Times is dangerous to the United States. Yes, it is dangerous. But it is dangerous not because of its views. Any views should be allowed. To defend Stalin, yes, there must be a newspaper defending Stalin. To defend Pol Pot, yes, there must be a newspaper defending Pol Pot. This is part of democracy.
Richard Allen's name was on that thing and why it was taken off.
I'll give you my explanation. Or Times declined the opportunity to come and appear on this panel.
Before answering, here is a short remark. Hundreds of journalists in New York are interested in only two things concerning our committee and concerning the New York Times. These two things are sort of McCarthyism in reverse. They want to find some criminal connection which would dispense with their need to answer us in a fair debate. They are moral cowards of the New York Times. They are intellectual nonentities. They are ignorant Philistines. That is what I'm saying publicly. They are afraid to appear in a fair debate. Whether I'm a gentleman or not, excuse me, I'm interested only in two things. The first thing is this story about the fact that Richard Allen sent a letter sort of notice to the effect which I'm going to divulge right now. The other story is our Mooney connection. How I'm connected with the Unification Church. Am I a member of the Unification Church? And all that kind of nonsense. It's the same as in the 40s. Here in the United States, Americans asked, are you connected with the Communist Party? Here, in this hall, I have a debate with a member, with a card-bearing member of the Communist Party. I never referred to his communist affiliations. I debated him on the merits of the case. It was not clear from my dialogue whether he's a member of the Communist Party at all, though he is. Now I am connection, and that connection, what happened to Richard Allen. This is the only two stories that have been of interest to you of the New York Times. And I'm going to publish Richard Allen letter next week. What happened is this. On May the 7th,
Richard Allen
we sent a letter
is a security advisor to the President of the United States.
National Security Advisor.
Yes,
right.
And yes, he was a member of the Center for the Survival of Western Democracies. On May the 7th, we sent a standard letter to every member of the Center for the Survival of Western Democracies, stating that the Center is sponsoring the alternative to the New York Times Committee. If the person has any objections or any suggestions or any amendments to make, he is welcome. If there is no answer for him, we will construe it as his tacit agreement. We did not receive a single objection, nor did Richard Allen object. I'm going to publish the entire damn God correspondence with him. That's what I'm going to do.
Well, fine. What do you
And
say
excuse me, I'm as a communist 40 years ago, or a former communist, was excited by being spoken all the time about his communist connections. I'm tired of that story because I'm telling that story that's the only thing you're interested in. And before this program starts,
are we going to have a debate or?
All right, excuse me. Let me finish.
Or fanatics.
Let me finish. I see fanatics, fascists. You are good at name calling. I know. The New York Times is famous for that. The press conference opened. I received a letter from Richard Allen, who said, and I'm almost quoting it verbatim, that to the best of my knowledge, or to the best of my remembrance, I think I sent you a letter several months ago saying that since I'm now in a security position with the government, I cannot continue to serve on your board. Now, I never received that letter from Richard Allen. He never sent it. That was negligence on his part, period. And from that negligence on his part, which is after all trifling, and which is a trifle, from that negligence on his part, there is a big story going on for weeks. For weeks, just some correspondents would grill me for hours about that story. I have finished, and all the materials will be published. Where? In the news world, with that terrible Mooney connection.
Made with such a movement, because then you begin to worry. And he has planted agents within the major media, so-called liberal media, which any sane person knows are relatively conservative media.
I spoke against that book and criticized it.
Well, you spoke against it, but I heard you say that at that meeting that Pravda was more factual than the New York Times.
That's true. That's true.
And I heard you making implications that the KGB was penetrating the time.
I'm not interested in KGB penetration. This is your fantasy. I always defended the New York Times against stupid accusations without any foundation, like the New York Times is spy reading. And like Mary Barron once noticed, very, very pointedly, that would excuse the New York Times. The New York Times is bad as it is. It's dangerous as it is without any Soviet spies inside.
John,
Well, the spy has nothing to do with us. We criticized it.
I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about this question. Arnold de Borgov's own paper. There's a very funny story. If you had the time, I can go into it. That they are penetrated by the KGB, and by implication, various organizations have spies in them pulling strings. Maybe Barry Farber's a KGB agent. How do we know?
asked me to make this message clear, to show cooperation. I asked my station, WMCA, if I could make this clear during commercial time. I am contributing the commercial time to make the following clear 5 times during this program. The alternative to the New York Times Committee, subject to this program, is sponsored by the Center for the Survival of Western Democracies. I, Barry Farber, am a member of the advisory board of that center. A company closely associated with the Reverend Sun Myung Moon's Unification Church publishes the newspaper News World. News World publishes all materials requested by the alternative to the New York Times Committee. In addition, I, Barry Farber, write a column for my syndicate, Syndicated Features Incorporated, which News World pays to carry in New York City. One of my guests, Lev Navrozov, also writes for and is paid by News World. That announcement was requested by WMCA and aired in commercial time, which I personally am providing. Just as we allowed as Americans, but I can prove it, I can produce it. There is a notice in a big city. Why protected? It's used to being kicked around. New York City. There is an advertising campaign that says, conceal your jewelry when you get on the subway. Take your necklace off and put it in your purse, or better yet, leave it at home. Don't go flashing anything attractive. Don't go flaunting anything. Now, to me, that is exactly like saying, hey, you black, you stay on the back of the bus. Now, you just sit down, you smile at the white man. Don't you make trouble. Make sure you know your place. To me, that is exactly like the Jew in Nazi Germany being told, now, don't do anything to show you're Jewish, and if you look Jewish, look the other way. Don't start anything. I mean, this is absolute, unconscionable surrender to the worst. I find something so intrinsically offensive about a city which should defend or be ashamed of it. Instead, turning the hose not on the fire, but on the fire chief, on the good people, and saying, be careful, it's out of hand, don't flash anything worth stealing. I can see saying, don't stand on a hill and pick up an iron pole and wave it straight up during a lightning and thunderstorm. Okay? I can see people saying, don't eat funny-looking mushrooms that you don't know anything about when you're walking out in the field. I can see people saying, when you are on a hike, do not curl up on a railroad track and take a nap after a hearty picnic lunch. I can see all those things.
Right.
That's a far cry from saying do not flaunt valuables. That is an admission. The first three are recognition of different kinds of vulnerability. But to say don't flash anything that might be grabbed is recognition of a vulnerability that I simply refuse to recognize. National Guidance Week and Law Enforcement, Jeffrey Harris is going to be the Secretary General. He was Assistant U.S. Attorney in New York's Southern District, Manhattan, prosecuted white-collar crimes, and so on through all that Korean influence excitement. He's now Executive Director of the Attorney General's Task Force on Violent Crimes.
Told him he has to make a much higher priority out of that. And we gave him a number of other suggestions. In phase 2 of our work, and it's interesting that the recommendations we will make to the Attorney General were voted on late this afternoon. We will recommend such things as modification of the exclusionary rule to permit evidence to be used against persons at trial, even where the constable makes a good faith blunder, changing the insanity defense, allowing judges to consider danger to the community in setting bail, and a number of other recommendations we can get into. We expect that these recommendations will very quickly, and I mean within a month, be turned into a legislative program for the Congress, and that we will get the administration's support.
One of those recommendations hints that you think the federal government really wants to cut narcotics traffic.
All right. I think the optimistic forecasts are that maybe we stop 10% of the narcotics. You know, you go to the government of Colombia in South America, and we say to them, we would like you to spray your fields. We'd like you to spray the cocoa leaves. And they say, fine, give us 3 helicopters and the herbicide, paraquat, to do it. And we say, we're sorry. Our own environmental law prevents us from giving you that herbicide. And they say, now, come on, you're not serious. You must be down here on some sort of public relations gimmick, because if you wanted us to help you, you wouldn't answer such a request with your law prevents us from using paraquat. Then you crank into the equation things like, and I don't think most of your listeners know this, we had testimony in Miami from the Attorney General of the state of Florida that 61,000 pounds of paraquat were used on agricultural crops in the state of Florida last year. And we have been wringing our hands over the terrible problem of whether we will spray narcotics with paraquat. So the evidence is that you are right. We aren't serious. Now, there's another factor. The Department of Justice may be serious, but what about the State Department? What about the Defense Department? It's going to take a commitment across the board. We compartmentalize our efforts in such a way that anyone who was coming to examine our scheme from another planet would question our rationality and have very little hope for us. Well, you're right. Crime is very different. You know, the best statistics tell us that this year alone, Barry, 1 out of every 8 households will be touched by a murder, a rape, a robbery, an assault, or a burglary. If you want to look at it another way, statistically speaking, everyone who is listening to your program tonight, their household can expect to be touched by one of those crimes before the end of this decade. Now, that's staggering. And when you look at the United States crime rate compared to other countries, you need a separate graph for us. They are clumped at the left side of the graph down all together, relatively the same, all the Western democracies in Japan. And the United States is off the chart. It's as simple as that. The justice system has become so convoluted that, in the words of an English barrister who was visiting us recently, he said, you have a rather interesting system here. He said, the main difference that I see between your system in the United States and the one we have in England is we seem a bit more concerned about whether the chap was guilty. I think that in a word sums up the problem with the criminal justice system. And I think the third reason is that in growing up today, we have reached a stage in society where if you can't succeed, we get a special track for you in school. And if you can't get into college, then we let you in with no criteria. And if you're not feeling well, we have a pill for you. So by the time you become an adult and you reach some crises in your life that you can't take a pill for, or someone can't give you a quick fix, we don't know how to cope with that. And I think when you combine those societal ills with the lack of respect for law, you have a brew which produces the hundreds of thousands of vicious crimes that Americans are subjecting each other to each year. No, I never said that an honest mistake wasn't a mistake. The question we're dealing with here is if the officer seizes evidence and the mistaken belief that he was acting within the Fourth Amendment, then that evidence would not be excluded at the trial of the defendant.
Who is to decide whether he has mistakenly believed it or whether he knew all the time
The same
that it was an illegal seizure?
person who now decides those very similar questions, the judge. And let me give you another part of the recommendation, and that is that if the officer has gone to a judge and gotten a warrant, which we say is what we want to encourage our officers to do, you go to the judge, you go to that independent magistrate. If the officer has done that, then if the magistrate has made a mistake as to what the law is and wrongly issued the warrant, the exclusionary rule wouldn't apply.
The first thing I heard, of course, was the state prisons, or rather the military bases that aren't being used for prisons. That has an awful lot of appeal, but I think there was a recommendation before that you mentioned.
Well, I mentioned several. In the area of we're just talking about, the exclusionary rule is the one I've just mentioned. I also mentioned the use of the Navy. I mentioned changing the bail laws, the insanity defense, several others. I'm not sure which one you have in mind, Barry. I am, and I hate to sound overconfident, but I really feel that by the end of this year, we will have a substantially different set of criminal justice laws than we do now. The answer is yes. I talk to members of Congress every day, and I've been dealing with congressmen in one form or another for a number of years. The time is right. Americans are willing to balance the criminal justice system so as to provide the protections for society. The question is, who do you give the benefit of the doubt to? The 220 million Americans who are trying to live honestly and commute to work and enjoy their lives, or solely to the defendants? The Attorney General and the President wanted to let this task force do its work, and it was a relatively short period, 120 days, while they concerned themselves with the tax situation and the economic.
You mean your thing was that
if you look at the recommendations we make and wait another 60 days, you will see a crime package from the administration, which I don't know that the President and the Attorney General will like every single recommendation we make, and that's their prerogative, but you'll see something substantially similar.
That's what I'm damned if I'm going to sit here in this year and listen to figures like 25 policemen killed and this quantum, not just more, marginally more, many more, but this dam-breaking, breathtakingly more violent crime in America than any other country, and sit here and pretend that population change has nothing to do with it. You're supposed to be a great liberal and not mention population change. I think you're a damn fool if you don't mention population change. And I think when you fail to mention population change, you are slighting honest, decent, law-abiding blacks, Hispanics, Chicanos, and others who are talked about when we're not doing radio shows. Moved to New York City in 1957, and that was the year it began to crack. No cause and effect. I mean, I didn't have that much to do with it. A lot of other people were moving to town. People less desirable than I. People less law-abiding in their personal habit and in their national tradition or their personal tradition or whatever tradition they brought than I. People with a lower standard, just different kinds of people. Tacky, trashy people. Now, watch me carefully. At no point do I mention a color. At no point do I mention a point of origin, because I believe that we are in a paralysis and we can't talk about this. Only when we impute crime to a group do we commit racism. I am not interested in color or accent or land of origin. I am interested in one and one thing only, and that is standards. Do you obey the law or do you not?
Like a lot of people, I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop as far as this administration is concerned on the suggestions that were made through the campaign that it was necessary to give the police broader powers. I feel that the Attorney General's recommendation are, without question, definite infringement on the First Amendment of the Constitution.
Hold it, Bill, hold it. The election of 1980, Ronald Reagan elected. Both of them waited for the other shoe to drop. Both of them heard the other shoe drop around summertime 1981. American Bill Rafael saying, "This is an infringement on our civil rights." Barry Farber saying, "Ooh, come on, feds, kick them again, they're still wiggling." And yet the American part is that Bill Rafael still has Barry Farber's total respect and affection.
Now, as the thing that I object to in some of the recommendations in the New York Times article today, the list reads like a repeal of the Bill of Rights of the United States. Now listen to these recommendations. Modify legislation governing bail so that a judge may take into consideration the danger to the community posed by the release of a particular defendant. In other words, the ability to remove bail. In other words, our ancestors fought to abolish search and seizure of property without due recourse to law, and you're taking it, you are destroying it. Now let's take the second. Provide the government with the right to appeal the release of defendants by the court. In other words, no court verdict is final. Double jeopardy.
Bill, hurry up and get to the insanity one. Come on.
Abolish the insanity defense in federal court and create a verdict of, get this,
This is the best.
guilty but mentally ill. Guilty but mentally ill.
What's
Now,
wrong with that?
isn't that a formulation?
Can I forget the idiotic change to guilty but nuts?
The article from which you're reading happens to be inaccurate. What the task force recommended was that in addition to the two stark ends of the pole, either sane or insane, that there is an area which in the law is known as diminished capacity. And the courts and the juries generally do not know how to deal with this problem of some mental illness, but not in the old English tradition of a mad dog, and that's the way it was described when they described insanity in England. And the idea here is modeled on a law which is going to be signed into law in Illinois next week, which says that in a case where the mental condition played a part in the crime, but it may not be enough for a jury to reach a conclusion of absolute sanity or absolute insanity, the judge ought to be given the option of instructing the jury that they can return this verdict. And that's what it is. Now, I do agree with you. This is one of many recommendations, and it is just one. And I agree that you are right.
Where did you gather evidence?
The predicate that we operate on isn't that too many people are getting off on insanity defenses.
What predicate are you arguing on?
It is. Well, let me ask, how many times have you ever seen the government psychiatrist in a case get up and say the fellow is insane? How many times have you ever seen the defense psychiatrist get up and say the defendant is sane? My guess is none of you have ever seen any of those that I suggested. Now, why do you think that happens?
The question is, how many people who are obviously...
Wait, you picked the wrong issue here, because what I'm trying to suggest to you is that what has happened is that superimposing the psychiatry on the law and having to come up with either an insane verdict or a sane verdict, that you're better off getting your psychiatrist from central casting, because the decisions are always made with one psychiatrist reaching one conclusion and the other reaching a diametrically opposite conclusion. Who does the jury believe? The jury believes the best actor. I'm saying that there ought to be a third option that the court can instruct the jury in appropriate cases. Insane, sane, or this middle ground.
Which is flip a coin.
Because basically the law and psychiatry mix about like oil and water do. And what it does is it makes a mockery of the system. When you force juries to come up with those simple two verdicts, sane and insane. Now, where you started on this is an area that I'll agree with you. It is not statistically a significant area. It is one of the smaller areas. But, and it is just one of...
Well, you can see the summary of Thomas Jefferson.
Why don't we talk about Thomas Jefferson and Ronald Reagan getting together?
You wouldn't embrace the medicine, Bill. You wouldn't embrace the medicine of the 1700s. I don't think you would embrace the air traffic control techniques of the 1700s. Why are you so
I'm simply saying what you're simply saying, what you seem to think is your Bill of Rights is obsolete. Is that what you're saying?
No, absolutely not. I walk the street unfearfully. My right to walk the streets unfearfully is a widely ignored right, and I want to direct upon that right some long overdue attention.
That judges now can consider only one thing in making a bail decision, and that is, will the defendant return to court? And they cannot consider danger to the community. So what they do in reality is they consider danger to the community, call it something else, and set high bail. What the task force says is the danger to the community is a legitimate thing for a judge to consider, and the best way to consider danger to the community is look at what this person has done when bailed before. So if the person has ever been arrested, out on bail, been convicted of a crime while on bail, he should thereafter be denied bail.
My friend, danger to the community because they were a danger to
Bill,
the community.
but you're not
very Orwellian.
Bill, wait, I just defined it.
Meanwhile, these people can spend a year or two coming to trial.
I just defined danger to the community for you, and you missed it.
Oh, you did? Well,
yes.
Please redefine it.
Who has been convicted of a felony while previously in a pretrial release status, while previously on bail.
When we get back to the behavior of Bill Raffel and Steve Gilbert on these microphones, reminds me of Maximilian Schell in that movie, Judgment at Nuremberg, or it was a different movie, but it was still Maximilian Schell, and he was a German attorney defending Nazis, and he jumped up in objection, and Your Honor, objection, 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 and he wouldn't hear of any Nazi crime. He would only hear of victimization of former members of Adolf Hitler's Corps, and you sort of forgave him because he was doing his job. He was an attorney appointed to defend Nazis, so you couldn't get angry. I want to know who appointed Bill Raffel and Steve Gilbert to defend the old rules by which criminals almost devoured America in a way that Adolf Hitler couldn't even dream of doing. Who appointed you to this role? Why do you embrace it voluntarily? What is it going to take to convince you that the ethic by which you guided yourselves from the late 40s until the 1980s was simply a bankrupt ethic, served only the criminal, protected the individual only provided that he had committed a crime?
Well, what's your answer? Right now we have a problem. You offered no solutions. Jeffrey Harris comes here tonight. He's got a solution. All you do is attack his solution. What's your solution? Harris has a solution. All you're doing is not get a solution. You're not offering anything better.
I'm telling you.
Going to put them in jail. In what jail? The prisons are so overcrowded that he's just talking about opening concentration camps to provide for the
concentration camp. It's a prison. It's a prison. That's right. We got room. And I think it's a darn good idea.
Can I ask you something, Bill? Why are people...
the world to know that I did not hire Bill Raffel or instruct him in how he should play his role. I'm sure there will be suspicion in the land that Bill Raffel is a plant, a front, a patsy, merely designed to intensify outrage against the position that he purports to hold. Bill Raffel is in his own capacity, on his own recognizance, manifesting his genuine feelings. He actually believes that Part 2 or 3 or 4 or 18, I don't know which one of the task force recommendations, where abandoned military bases shall become new prisons. Bill Raffel, I'm sure, in his heart, in his bone marrow, actually believes that these would be concentration camps.
My friend,
that the way you got to Nazi concentration camps was not by breaking a law. It was by being Jewish. It was by having
against the law.
It was by having too much affection for the ideals of Thomas Jefferson, resisting tyranny. That's how you got to Nazi concentration camps. I reassure you that in these American, what you call concentration camps, you will get there for quite different reasons, and I predict that unlike Nazi concentration camps, those who emerge from these American concentration camps will at the very least have gained weight.
You know, we read something about that the government shall have the right to appeal release decisions by the court. Now, let me, just to make sure you didn't misunderstand it, tell you what that is. You know, when a judge sets bail for a defendant, if the defendant is unhappy with the amount that bail was set in, he has a right to go to another court and ask them to review it. The government has no such right if the government feels that bail was set in an incorrect amount. That recommendation merely says that if the government, the other side in this case in controversy, feels that bail was set in an unfair amount for whatever reason, they have the right to go to another judge and ask for a review of the decision. Now, after explaining that to you, if you are still appalled by it, you and I have a difference. But I...
This reason. What then, when that judge decides that the bail is not right, then you'll have to have another law to go beyond that one.
No.
It's just double jeopardy. Come on, let's face it. You'll convict me in that one, right?
Bill, what we're talking about is setting bail. We're setting about the bail decision. About what amount of money or
a little thing like setting bail.
No, I'm not saying it's a little thing.
Okay.
No, but when you throw double jeopardy around, you are either legally confused or hopefully.
I'm simply.
Bail. What I'm saying is, if a judge says, in the case of John Smith, the defendant, I think that I will set bail in the amount of $100. John Smith said that's too much money. I think that I'll show up if you set bail at $50. John Smith has a right to go to an appellate court, to another judge, to get that decision reviewed. The other side in that case in controversy in our adversary system has no such right.
Right.
This recommendation merely gives both sides the same right of appeal.
Both sides. In other words, the government. You're talking about these.
I'm talking about it because
what
you're
talking about here. Let's get back to another issue.
Okay.
All right. Habeas corpus, Jim. All right, fine. But the founding fathers kind of thought it was a nice thing to have around.
Habeas corpus is, in my view, the most important constitutional right that anyone has. Let me tell you what it is, Bill.
Back up and explain what habeas corpus is.
Habeas corpus is a right which comes from English law, and it basically says that in our system in the United States, if you have been denied a constitutional right, you have a right and you're in custody, you have a right to appeal to a federal court, the arbiter of the U.S. Constitution, to determine if you have, in fact, been denied a constitutional right, and if so, you are entitled to be released.
Wait a minute, let's not call it constitutional right. Why don't we call it being put in jail?
Well,
or a habeas corpus. What does the word mean?
I suffer from...
Produce the body.
I suffer from perhaps having been overeducated, but I mean, it's not being put in jail. It is having been deprived of constitutional right, and I prefer to be a little more accurate. It generally involves someone in jail, but not always. But that's not important. Now,
okay.
let me tell you what. If you can stop laughing, you might even listen.
I can do both.
Okay, good.
Simultaneously.
What the statute of limitations is.
Forgive me, Jeffrey Harris will be right back, and it'll be your turn to start again.
Is breeded in poverty. That's where this starts. Poverty.
Oh.
How do you stop them?
Steve, you know, I assume that you think you have a basis for that statement.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Harris.
I'm quite sure you don't. The best studies and the period during our time in which we had the biggest explosion in crime was in the early 60s during a period of relative economic prosperity. Now, please explain that to me, because I think it's not poverty. You know what it is? That if you look at the ages at which people commit crime, it's generally from roughly 15 to 27, 28. Those are the prime years. Start to match the baby boom. We built hospitals to accommodate this group of people as they grew up. We built schools to accommodate them. We did not build a criminal justice system to accommodate people, a vast number of people coming into the prime crime committing years. And nothing to do with poverty. It has to do with demographics.
arrange it, I will tell when. Okay? Now, what's wrong with camps for criminals? I cannot imagine liberals will cry about two things, that jails are overcrowded, and if you put criminals in any place else, it's a concentration camp. What I'm going to, I will tell you right now that had my staff come to me and said, Barry, there's a Mr. Alan Michael, he's written he's traveling across the country promoting a master plan that was given to him by extraterrestrials, I'd say, no thanks, not my cup of tea.
Impossible.
Sir, I'm telling you the way I run my mission. You run your mission your way, I run my mission my way. It's called democracy. I'm telling you that had I spotted you coming, I would have politely declined to sit here with open microphones and hear what the extraterrestrials told you about a master plan for the planet Earth. Now then, through my fault, not being a good enough supervisor of my own team, you broke through my defenses. I learned when it was too late that you had been booked with full dignity and honors accorded a Barry Farber show guest, and here you are, you're with your team, you're tape recording everything. Fine. I will proceed as follows. By way of apology, I will give you one whole segment. It may not seem like much to you. It's 15 minutes minus commercials, but it is the best I am willing to do. That is in payment, outright payment for your having been abused. You have been technically abused by me, okay, because you've been invited for the full thing, and now you hear this hostility toward the nature of your mission. And I don't want to take any time away from Milt Macklin and from Mike Luckman. If they like to do is to give you one entire segment, apologize to you for having had to do this, for having you booked by other than me, and I accept responsibility. And, remain friends, and perhaps I can even refer you to some other broadcasters who would love to spend hours and hours and hours talking to somebody with a master plan given to him by extraterrestrials. Okay? And I want to read 3 short paragraphs. One is from the back of Alan Michael's book, UFO-ETI, World Master Plan. It says, Alan Michael, world humanitarian and psychic adept, after 30 years of assimilating UFO data as a direct telepathic channel for galactic ETI space beings, brings forth at this time this beautiful, sensible, nonviolent world master plan to guide humanity into harmonious living according to the natural dynamics of the universal mind. All right, I will now use paper in Coos Bay, Oregon. Founder of New Age Synthesis Party, UFO believer, hopes to land in White House, has a plan, Stockton, UPI. Like other presidential candidates, Alan Michael claims to have the answers to inflation, unemployment, and war. But his is the only foolproof plan, insists the 63-year-old founder of the New Age Synthesis Party, because it was devised by extraterritorial beings he says he met on a flying saucer. His story of being beamed aboard a spaceship in a shaft of light is taken seriously by at least a 30-member commune that occupies 8 houses in Stockton and the 100 or so member Universal Industrial Church of the New World Covenant, both started by Michael. Now, as I said, Mr. Michael, this is not my kind of broadcasting. We're just, he snores and she's deaf. We're wrong for each other. I am not commenting upon the experience of Mr. Michael at this moment. I am merely commenting upon my own attitude toward my own broadcasting. I choose not to make broadcasting stuff of those who say that they have been beamed aboard spaceships and have come back with a master plan for the Earth. Look, some people don't do sports, some people don't do sex. I don't do that. Read that into my attitude and nothing more than that. I'm not part of a jeering throng. If anything, I think I have a little bit of compassion for Mr. Michael. But thank you for giving me a chance to state that.
And furthermore, the introduction that you gave me is just superb. There's more people out there right now that are for, what I'm saying than what you're.
In other words, we take a vote on who believes in outer space.
You don't have to take a vote at all. I mean, people,
you're saying
rule the planet.
You're saying that more people believe you than believe me. I don't know when's the last time you counted noses around the planet Earth as to who believes what. But what if 100% of the people in the world believe you, and I'm the only one who believes me? Would that mean that you are right and you have indeed been beamed aboard a spaceship?
I could very well have been. You see, you don't know.
That's not my point. I will say something in his behalf that he has not yet said himself. I believe that most people listening right now would like to hear more of him, would like him to tell his adventures aboard the spaceship, would like him to describe the commune and the fellowship in California that lives by the fact that he was on that spaceship. And I don't care if I'm outvoted 100-1. If it were my last broadcast, if I got a telegram now from my boss saying, Barry, Michael, a big hit, audience loves, keep him on whole show, I'd burn the telegram and walk out and never come back to the studio again. That's my feeling about what I do to draw a crowd and what I will not do to draw a crowd. This is no rejection of Alan Michael. It is merely a restatement of what I will not do in terms of broadcasting standards and chasing stories and trying to have good, clean intellectual scholarship and showmanship on open microphones.
That's being off the record, man.
Off the record? This microphone is on.
Well, I know it's on.
Sir, I'm not...
Either you're playing a big game,
sir,
or you're...
I have changed my mind. You have changed my mood. If you care right now, and this is the exhaustion of my patience, if you care right now, in return for your having driven across town, as you say, I will let you state your master plan. You have 5 minutes. You may take 7 minutes. You may take the balance of this segment. But I no longer, I've stated my point as politely as possible. I don't participate with people on my show who make the type appeal to the audience that you do. You see, I have not been on a spaceship. Whether I believe you have or not is immaterial. I just don't do that to grab audience.
Okay, well, give me my 5 minutes or 7
fair enough.
Whatever, and I'll take off.
Fair enough.
No hard feelings.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm organizing a worldwide work stoppage where everyone stops working but keeps the necessary services and supplies rolling. In other words, keep the food, the clothing, the shelter, utilities, communications, keep those things going, but stop the world. The purpose of that is to bring about a disarmament of the whole planet and get people started into setting up the ways and means for the total sharing of all things all over planet Earth, to bring in a new age, which I believe that's what the essence of the flying saucer movement is all about. We would just stop working, and the total transformation of the planet would take place, because during that time, the government of the United States would print a new world currency, or free cash flow money, to get out from under bank interest money and taxation. Amman is a way of uniting the people, of stopping these wars. The wars are not accomplishing anything, and no more war is going to accomplish anything.
Do you favor that communist society?
No, I accept that as a reality. That has happened. The world is divided against itself. You see,
that Mr. being apologized to. This will go down in my diary as a misbooking. Like if you were to show up on a cooking show and you're a sports star, somebody made a mistake, we laugh, we put our arms around our shoulders, we walk each other to the elevator, and we're friends. That has
been exposed to a lot of it, and all the arguments seem to work backwards. It's like saying, if I look at this watch, and somebody says to me, do you know there's about 12 million little teeny men in there on treadmills making those little things go around? Can you prove that it isn't? That's the kind of argument. I say, look, I say, no, I can't. They say, well, then what makes it go? I say, I haven't a clue. I've been wearing this watch for a year. It just tells me numbers. I don't know what makes it go, but that doesn't mean that it's little teeny men on treadmills, nor does it mean that if somebody chases something that they can't identify, that it's a saucer manned by people from outer space.
I have given up on publishers hiring neutral or even hostile people to these intriguing, money-making themes such as UFOs. The late Felix Greenfield, did you ever know him, Milt?
I didn't know him, no.
Yeah, Felix Greenfield was like Houdini, always on the lookout on behalf of mankind for frauds and charlatans and people who preyed on ignorance and suspicion and desire to get into the occult. And Felix told about going to a publisher one time and saying, how about a book on numerology? Publisher said, fine, great idea, fantastic, goes right with the times. Felix gave him an outline completely not just debunking but destroying numerology, left it a smoking crater. And the publisher said, wait a minute, that's not what we want. We want a book endorsing numerology, supporting it, not debunking. Nobody's going to buy that. Now, I just assumed that was the law of the publishing world. Mike Luckman thinks I'm anti-UFO. I am not. I am merely pro-journalism, pro-scholarship, pro-history, pro-precision, anti-hype, anti-pandering, anti-sensationalism, and anti-playing games. Some people, some heavily educated people, need a whole lifetime to get over a Harvard or a Yale education, sometimes even Princeton. I am not that kind of intellectual. All I need is a couple of good old friends to help me get over a recent trip to Europe. I have just come back from Europe, and I can't take it many more times. I can't take going to Europe and seeing what's what in the world and having the neutralistic airlines, the cowardly embassies, the détente-oriented travel agencies, all the la-di-da business as usual, smiling people on all sides of everything, trying to gussy up everything and cover everything up. And meanwhile, Barry Farber from Greensboro, North Carolina, goes over there, and right away, like ammonia cutting through grease on the back of a stove, I see through everything. And I want to jump up and down and pound and scream and say, hey, folks, look at here. Here's the answer to everything in the world. Look at Poland. They are starving. They are angry. They are oppressed. They are about to pay twice as much and sometimes 3 times as much for food and get less food while across, not an ocean, you can't call the Baltic Sea an ocean. Where I come from, they'd call it a river. It's certainly no more than a lake. On the other side of that lake, you got free countries, democracies, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and you can't look at all the food they have left over. It's about the last general I met at a party, retired. He was formerly in NATO, and he told me about the war games where we successfully, in our war game, conquered Denmark. We did very well against the Norwegians. We even beat the Germans in our NATO war games. But he started telling me about what Russia has on the line in Europe. And he was not talking as an embittered, embattled American Legion post commander saying the Ruskies are way ahead. He was talking like a 4-year-old poor boy who had just spent the day happenstantially in the home on the hill of a very wealthy boy. And he was telling his parents about all the toys. I mean, there was no East, West, communism, free. He was a military man. And he was telling me about all the toys that the Russians have that we don't have. And he was admiring. His eyes were wide. They were glistening. He said, Barry, they can push a button and zap out all of our radio contact at the tactical level. They have things we don't even know of it. We don't know how they work. We don't even have them on the drawing board. He was talking about the small tanks and the big tanks and the landing tanks by air and sea, the Soviet Union with nobody on its side. It's like a big underworld sitting there. Nobody is on the Soviet side. As far as I can perceive, the Russian people are not on the Soviet side, and yet they are very, very powerful, and they are feared, and everybody defers to them. Everybody says, come on, you don't want to provoke a war, do you? But in saying that, they are admitting there is a wretched presence here It is wrong. It is aggressive. It enslaves. It seeks further to enslave. We want freedom, whether we are the new democracy in Portugal or an old democracy in Sweden. We want freedom. What in the world can we do? The Soviet Union is so powerful. The chair just wants to ask Doug Ireland if he has any complaint against the other 51 dictatorships on the continent of Africa.
I have a problem with any society in which people are denied participation.
Come on, Doug. Let's hear it about the black dictatorships. Let me hear your Nazi, fascist. Let me hear your zeal. Let me hear your zeal against the black dictatorships, too, so you can have some credibility in this council. I'll recognize you next, Andrew. In breaking, let me point out that the South African government is not Nazi. The Nazis and the fascists built concentration camps for extermination. They did not build trans skies for development of other peoples. I mean, there are phrases... Up. If all you know about Israel is what you learned from Doug Ireland, what do you see? Well, why did they come from Europe after the Holocaust? Why did they redeem the promise? Why did they make the desert bloom? Why did they fight for their independence in 48 and 56 and 67 and 73? Doug Ireland gives us the answer. The real Zionist aspiration is to help the secret police of Iran. Yeah. What they really want to do is go give aid and comfort to the lackeys of Somoza. That's what Israel is all... Making the desert bloom is a public relations ploy, don't you see? Giving a home to displaced Jews. There are 20... Forgive me for talking while you're interrupting. There are 22 Arab homelands, you see. There's one Jewish homeland, but all this Jewish homeland business is a front, folks. The real reason for Israel is to help Somoza torture Nicaraguans, you see. That was the whole... David Ben-Gurion used to whisper to Chaim Weizmann, you know, if we give the world enough of this Zionist pretension, they will buy our act, and then we can torture Nicaraguans. That's our real goal. I was on an airplane flying over Norway. Well, you don't fly over Norway too long when you take off from Oslo. You're in Sweden before you unfasten your seatbelt. And there we set to reading. We'd been out of the United States for a few days. It was summertime, 1981. And all of a sudden, my eyeballs bulged and dangled by the optic nerve. I saw a familiar name I hadn't seen in years. Thorvald Stoltenberg, Defense Minister of Norway. And I gagged. I said, Lily, look, Thorvald. He was number one man on the rope, and I was number two on the Hungarian border pulling refugees across after the communist uprising. And I told her of Thorvald's heroism, jumping on his belly and paddling that rubber raft across the Eisner Canal into Hungarian communist waters when we lost our boatmen and their paddles, and we still had 40 refugees to get across before the Hungarian communist secret police came out of the woods, and we could already see their flashlights in the distance, etc. Thorvald Stoltenberg, now dried up in new clothes, undoubtedly wearing a necktie, and Defense Minister of Norway. 1939, my mother oppressed me. I was a little kid, getting fitted for a new suit, short pants, a little vest, nice little necktie in Baltimore, Maryland, standing on a stool, leaning over, trying to read what that paper said, Hitler, Hitler says C-Z-E-C-H-O, and I says, Mommy, what does C-Z-E-C-H-O-S-L-O-V-A-K-I-A mean? And she said, shut up and stand still. Repressed me, stifled my curiosity, completely eviscerated my willingness to learn, eagerness to learn. My mother repressed me. Now, that's a fact. Now then, turn the page. She also conceived me, gave me birth, nurtured me, nourished me, gave me love, aid, comfort, support. And I think the analogy is kind of true. America has indeed repressed peoples and supported repressive forces, but America has been the heart-lung machine for democracy, wherever democracy lives. It lives because of America. It lives because of America in Canada, in Costa Rica, in Iceland, in Greenland, in the Faroe Islands, in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Britain, Ireland, Wales, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Finland, Switzerland, Greece, Austria, Italy, Israel, Australia, New Zealand, wherever democracy exists, it exists because of America.
You're going to get mail from... How about Argentina?
Fine. I'm telling you where we support... Well, I've given you the countries where we support democracy. Where does the Soviet Union support democracy? Where does Communist China support democracy?
It doesn't support anything.
And we only support dictatorship. We support democracy. My point is, I don't want to have to wait until 2/3 through a broadcast like this to grab you by the collar and shake you and say, hey, Doug, so much for repression. What about the fact that we are the guardian and the guarantor of whatever democracy exists on the planet Earth? Now look at Israel. Israel, sitting there for all the years since 1948 with a strange rule. Strange rule. Israel lives up to a different standard of expectations from the PLO. The PLO aims in on civilians, children, and then women. Israel responds by knocking out PLO guerrilla concentrations.
And that the children in Beirut were killed.
Forgive my talking while you're interrupting. That's exactly what I'm. That's exactly what I'm building to, Doug. For 30 years, the ping pong game goes on, with Israel living up to the high expectations of the world, and only attacking military targets. Wait a minute. And the PLO concentrating most particularly and specifically on civilian targets. Stand your nervousness at the point that you know is coming, but relax, pal, and let it come and see if you can come up with a better one, okay? Israel then, after 30 years of that kind of ping-pong where they respond manfully militarily, the PLO cowardly attacks children. Israel says something has got to change. The world is not taking into account that we are getting our civilians hit. We are responding only on military targets. And what do we, Israel, get? We get faint praise from silent philosophers. The PLO is not impressed with that. We must show that the rules have changed. That's what Israel did in Lebanon, to the consternation, I must say, of every single pro-Israeli, every single Jew I've talked to, and I was in a position to talk to American Jews. Right there in the middle, I didn't meet one single Jew who wasn't paralyzed with consternation at what Israel did. I'm explaining what Israel did the only way I know how. I don't think that Israel said, hot dog, we've been in business since 1948. Now we can lash out and do what we really want to do, kill Arab children.
Not say that the Beatles were nobody or nothing. All I said was a very simple little thing, that the Beatles did not just occur on the scene by themselves and with nothing else that ever happened before. I said by the time the Beatles came, a 10-year period had occurred. The war had been fought and won by rock and roll. Won against Sylvia Sims and all of her friends. Won totally. When they came, it was a new world. By the children, for the children. That was it. The world was over. It was gone. They didn't just come here and hit just like that. There was a lot of hype before they ever came. They had a couple of records that didn't do a goddamn thing here before they came. They didn't just do it. It's all I said. There was no such thing as a rock gene that people were born with after the war. That at the age of 8, when Elvis Presley came in, or 9, just was actuated. That somehow or other, the world came different because it was all by themselves they did it. That's all I said. About the Beatles? That the word about the Beatles was, and the word that still exists, even apparently with my friend Sylvia, who was hurt by them as all of her friends were, is that I somehow did something bad by suggesting that the Beatles was a hype. What I say is that the whole genre was a hype. What I say was that none of it would have happened just by itself. Now, everything you can also say was a hype in some way. But the only thing that was never suggested as a hype was rock and roll. In the whole world of marketing in every area, everything else was suggested to be a hype, was said to be a hype.
We were all aware of the advertising
aspects and the hype. Believe in rock and roll also believe that the CIA has done everything to them. Madison Avenue did everything to them. But the one place which was the most marketable, the most profitable, the biggest place in all the world that they never were touched by was rock and roll. They think that came from themselves, inside themselves. It was their music and they did it. In that context, I said that some people think, and I am, by the way, one of them, that the Beatles were the biggest hype that ever hit, but not by themselves, but because I wrote before that what the whole last 10 years had been. Before the Beatles ever showed. When was it? That in the early 50s, a certain number of guys got together and just decided that they were going to have some kind of new music and just went. It didn't go much because the record company stopped it. For a while they did. The big ones did. Then they saw that there was such a thing, that radio was in trouble. Radio was absolutely madness, in trouble. They thought they were dead. They thought TV would wipe them out in the early 50s. They took a shot. Top 40. They went. So then when people saw that they were going to do it, because they did a direct hit on the kids, I mean kids, 9 years old, 10 years old, 11, like that, those kind of kids, with the lowest form of music, which the Beatles fans don't not want to talk about now, with the great stuff about the Beatles that you all talk about, including Sylvia, you don't want to talk about because it went right direct into the kids with the lowest form of music they could give them, below the belt, not below only the neck, as Mick Jagger and his friend Keith Richards said. All of rock and roll is below the neck. It was really even below the belt. That's what they did. That's what they won. The war was over by the time the Beatles came, is all I said. The war was over. They had won it.
Opening statements. We can go from there. That's my history lesson. Down south, I remember, I was just old enough, but I remember all of us thought that Bobby Soxers were attracted to Frank Sinatra, and they swarmed in where he was singing, and they swooned. Northern boys the same age knew it was hype. That's why the North won. Disregard everything else. That's why the North won. Sid Burton. That's my opinion. Sidney Zion.
Well, the one song that knocked off the Beatles for about a week or two was Louis Armstrong doing Hello Dolly. That's a new guy in town. It's the first time he hit number one, and David Merrick had to pay to get that record released. He had to pay $3,000 to get the record released because they said, who the hell is Louis Armstrong? In 1964. In 1962, you had a couple of things still going on, like Tony Bennett, and I Left My Heart in San Francisco, and a few other little things like that. But even then, and from 54 on, from 55, 6, whatever, Presley, that whole period, there was a thing that was going on. While you're saying this about rock not being so good then, but at the same time, during that period, they were removing from the market a lot of things because something else was going on, a major marketing thing. A mass market was coming in. They were going to the kids. They did that. You see, you say, well, the kids saw something, but what you're not saying is who was delivering it to the kids. Somebody was delivering a message to them. There were guys like Alan, what's his name, the guy, Freed, who said, it's your music. I had a lot of trouble with this piece at the Times with the young editors, tremendous trouble. The biggest trouble I had was that they did not believe for a minute that they were sold anything. Now, these are very sophisticated young editors in their early 30s, late 20s, who believe, probably, and not only probably, but I know some of them actually say so, that everything in the world is sold to them. The CIA gave them this, and the FBI gave them that, and Madison Avenue gave them everything, and the Kennedy assassination, and all the rest. The one thing they cannot believe is that anyone could conceivably have sold them their music. And that's because what was factored in was that it was our music. That was factored in, see? So therefore, if you factor that one in, therefore, how could anybody sell you what's yours? I think it was one of the great marketing adventures of all time. What I don't understand is why anybody would argue with that notion, because it isn't to say that it's something terrible, it's to say that it's something factual. It doesn't mean the music has to be bad, it simply means that why wouldn't it happen there? Why would they allow one of the big industries of all time to just go by itself? Madison Avenue would let that one go by itself and just let the kids do it by themselves with a rock team? Go on.
I think I want to introduce Chris Stewart, who I think is going to be in the tradition of gut fighter for America. He's certainly an American by choice and not by chance, a British marathon Olympic running champion who, as I say, won the last Olympics by refusing to participate. One of two British athletes on the Olympic team who refused to participate. Now, here's what Charlie, you should have seen what this man told him in Moscow. What this man told him wherever he runs behind the Iron Curtain. What tells his British colleague. And at last report, he had run so far that he had decided to become an American forever. And this is English runner hits the trail for America. Quote, the world owes so much to the United States. Boycotted Moscow Olympics. Can you imagine British runner Chris Stewart making his own foreign policy, boycotting the Moscow
By the way, I just read a description recently of the British team coming out of the Soviet Union. It was an East-West magazine. And the British athletes, as their airplane left Soviet airspace on their way back to Britain, had wild cheering all over the airplane. They say that it was absolutely wretched there for the trip. And this was the British team apparently went there.
Some of the British team.
And were very, very, some of the British team went there and it was a downer for them. They thought it was just wretched in the Soviet Union.
Well, Chris, his hands in
George Bush, in the sense that we're seeing for the first time a really coordinated policy, a foreign policy and a fiscal policy.
Something else. I have never known a cooperative paranoid. Paranoids don't cooperate. They cause trouble with everybody. Now, if medical science wants me, I'm available. My rates are a little high, and I don't have all that much time. But I find myself what I call a cooperative paranoid. I watch the network news, and I don't care how straight they play it, I see something. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't care, flat fields, sunny day, I've eaten my riboflavin, leafy green vegetable, I'm feeling good, stomping my foot, a tune in my heart, not angry at anybody, and I turn on the network news, and something they do makes me say, uh-oh, look at them, they'll stop at nothing. I noticed it within the past few hours. What they did this time, Charlie, and I wish you'd been there. See, maybe it's because I knew you were coming that I was sort of watching extra intently. It wasn't one single word or one single story, but the whole attitude of the Russia-Poland thing is that Russia doesn't want to do this. Oh, they really don't want to invade and bear the onus of invasion. They'd really rather not. One of them even said, Soviet Russia's been trying for a year not to invade Poland. Honestly. And I wondered if you could cross-reference this attitude. I sense a little assent from Chris Stewart over here. Chris, well, this is time for what we call a break. In America, unlike in your native England, see, I give citizenship lessons live and in person.
By the way,
I just wanted to tell Chris the way Ivan Sanderson, a Great Britain, once explained to listeners, we have what we call commercials and you call advertisements. And we're one bit of redeeming social value in the horrendous cost of mailing a letter now. And the only thing that gives me joy in the increase in postal rates in America is that it costs those anti-Semitic bigots that much more to write me letters. I don't ask for letters, I get them. I'm not one of those broadcasters who says keep those letters and cards coming. Charles Wiley here with commentary now on the neutron bomb.
The neutron bomb is the first step, and I think that it has been an outrage that the controversy on the neutron bomb has gone the direction it's gone, which has been a general falsification of the situation. and at the very least, a totally non-objective view, but non-objective view from the communist side. In other words, there are two views of a neutron bomb. One is the straight communist line view of a neutron bomb. The other is the view of those who are calling strategy shots in the free world. Now, at the very least, there are two views. At the very least, you would think that the American news media would present both viewpoints, both those of their own country and those of the enemy country. I mean, if you want it to really be objective, you at least show your own country. This is an absurdity that they continually report in words that come right out of the Moscow propaganda book, the neutron bomb. I get the idea when they talk about the neutron bomb is a bomb. When it was first reported that the Reagan administration was going to go ahead with neutron bombs, when that first happened, you'll remember that the first coverage was the neutron bomb kills people without destroying property. And they kept repeating this over and over as if that was the only reason that you build a neutron bomb. And of course, the truth of the matter is that you could have described it somewhat differently and been much more accurate. You could have said the neutron bomb kills Soviet tank crews without killing German civilians. That would be another way to describe the neutron bomb, where you could have said that the neutron bomb kills aggressors going into Western Europe without also destroying the homes, the hospitals, the libraries with all of the books of the last couple thousand years, and the museums and all of the other things that make a civilization worthwhile. They always describe how it spares property, and they always say property as if property were the factories and the office buildings owned by some filthy capitalists who were gouging the people out of their daily bread. Property, in the case of Europe, means the homes of those people over there. What we have is a situation where the only way the Soviet tanks can be stopped is by blowing up the countryside and the cities of our allies. And the neutron bomb gives you a chance to defend Western Europe without destroying the cities of the people who were trying to defend. Right. Obviously, the communists wouldn't like the neutron bomb, and they now are threatening to build their own neutron bomb. They have no use for a neutron bomb. The neutron bomb is a defensive weapon, and the Soviet Union has no use. For them to say that we won't build a neutron bomb if you won't build a neutron bomb would be roughly like a rabbi saying, I won't eat pork if you won't, or a priest saying, I won't eat meat on Friday if you won't eat meat on Friday. I mean, it's absurd.
Well, that's the feats of Scandinavia right this minute. There are campaigns to, you'll see, card tables and petitions to make Scandinavia a nuclear-free zone. Now, this has a tremendous ring to it. I mean, how can you not lend your name to the making of Scandinavia into a nuclear-free zone? And what annoys me is this is the same obvious, clumsy communist genesis as the old Stockholm Peace appeal. Yeah.
Right, and the Soviets have made it clear they will not pull their nuclear weapons out of the peninsula right alongside of those same Scandinavian countries. So those idiots are voting, in effect, to pull all nuclear weapons out of their countries while the Soviet Union keeps nuclear weapons within sight almost of their border. I mean, they're not too swift, those folks.
And by the way, here, Hams, what I'm explaining is that I was supposed to be too ill to handle this broadcast now. See, I had root canal work done. You know the way it hurt us to give away the Panama Canal. That's the way it hurts individually when a dentist does root canal work inside your mouth. And the attitude of the guy was, Russia is doing its patient best not to invade Poland. And then a little thing like this, Charles. Hungary, another communist nation, Hungary criticized Poland. Now, innocent Americans looking at this are going to say, well, dear me, it's not just Russia. Here's another communist country. So maybe the polls aren't that right, and maybe they aren't that righteous because it's no longer just Russia. Here's another communist country. Now, I think it is the journalistic responsibility to say Hungary, comma, a total puppet of the Soviet Union.
And this has been going on
for, is, I think, how can you capsulize it, that the left liberal or ultra-liberal position, and I very carefully split that away from the liberal position or the right liberal position, which are your social democrats in this country who are very hardline anti-communist and so on. But your ultra-liberal or your left-liberal position is based on a whole series of things, many of which are psychological, having nothing whatsoever to do with the issues they're involved in. And I think that a tremendous proportion of the people who are in the media, and my God, there are unbelievably great exceptions to this rule, but I think that many of the people who are in the media come from that ultra-liberal background, and you could do a guilt-ridden beyond belief so that they see flaws in America in a totally different way than they see flaws in anybody else. They have problems. I realized years ago in arguing with some of the ultra-liberals that I am trying to get there intellectually, and I forget who it was, but some great man once said, you can't destroy with intellectual argument an idea that somebody has in their head through non-intellectual means.